Welcome. This deep dive into the 1970s is a quiet reflection.
We propose to move beyond the usual characterizations of the decade.
The noise, the disco, and instead, to examine the era through its most fundamental material structures.
Our sources today reveal three distinct artifacts of personal and civic life.
Artifacts that betray the deep societal shifts underway. We'll be looking at the evolving form of personal appearance.
The validation mechanics of financial transactions.
And finally, the shifting scale of personal mobility in the United States.
We approach this period not as a simple compilation of trends, but, well, as a decade where the foundations of modern consumer society were visibly reforming themselves.
And what surfaces?
A profound central conflict, a widespread, almost desperate desire for extreme individualism, for anti-conformity.
Struggling directly against the immense forces of mass production.
And increasing regulatory demands and, of course, economic necessity. To truly understand this, we must begin with the most intimate form of expression.
The structure, or perhaps the lack of structure, in clothing. In the earliest years of the decade, fashion appeared to declare that the established rulebook had been, for a time, fully suspended.
There was a proclamation, I believe, from Vogue magazine,
that there were no rules in the fashion game now.
And this sense of unbounded freedom was certainly enabled by the sheer economic accessibility of garments.
The market was flooded with affordable synthetic fabrics.
This freedom allowed for distinctly contradictory aesthetics to coexist in the same cultural space, particularly between 1970 and 1973.
On one side, you had the clear inheritance of the counterculture.
The hippie look, characterized by a deliberate ethnic flavor, the use of bright tie-dye bell-bottom trousers.
And accessories made from natural elements, wood, shells, simple stones.
It was an aesthetic deliberately tethered to the earth.
Yet at the very same time, as if pulling from a different past entirely, we saw a resurgence of 1940s movie star glamour.
A completely different formality.
It demanded sophisticated items like cloche hats, turbans, and notably substantial cork-soled platforms and chunky high heels.
A sensibility that consciously rejected the earth tones and deliberate casualness of the hippie movement.
In favor of a controlled, if theatrical, glamour, the polarization was quite remarkable.
Following this period of stylistic warfare, the mid-decade coalesced around a general move toward a more relaxed silhouette.
This would be roughly 1974 through 1976.
Yes. The prevailing rule was typically tight on the top and loose or layered at the bottom. This was the moment of the big look.
Or the soft look, as it was sometimes called, a trend that maintained prominence until early 1978.
The defining characteristic of this soft look was volume.
A voluminous, unconstructed shape that required a tremendous consumption of material. We are speaking of sheer yardage.
Using thin, flowing, natural fiber fabrics, cotton gauze or the delicate crepe de chine.
And crucially, any inner structure linings, padding, anything that imposed a rigid form was deliberately eliminated.
The social context here is perhaps the most fascinating aspect. This shift toward comfort and physical flow was highly suited to the changing, more active lives of women.
Both professionally and domestically.
Indeed. And its figure-concealing nature was not accidental. In some intellectual circles, it was actively celebrated as a manifestation of the emerging feminist influence.
A rejection of what was termed man-focused coquetry.
Exactly. This interpretation framed the look as a kind of liberation.
However, it also drew significant criticism precisely for its lack of definition.
Critics called the soft look droopy, rumpled.
And even extravagant, despite its perceived liberation, simply because of the sheer yardage of expensive fabric required to achieve that flow.
A contradiction. Freedom demanding costly material.
And this brings us to the profound irony within the fashion narrative of the decade.
That this era of flowing, unconstructed freedom eventually collapsed back into a state of pronounced, enforced structure in the late 1970s.
Spanning from 1977 to 1979.
The initial demand for natural ease began to collide quite forcefully with a new, necessary formality.
A formality required for professional advancement and public visibility. Two key structured items emerged from this tension. First, the pantsuit.
Its eventual acceptance as appropriate business wear for executive women was far more than a style update.
It was a clear political statement, a demand for professional equality in a world historically tailored for men.
Owing much of its authority to Yves Saint Laurent's earlier and quite aggressive Le Smoking tuxedo.
And the second item, perhaps more telling, was the shoulder pad.
It's essential to note the origin of this dramatic silhouette change. unlike the bell-bottoms, which arose organically from the street.
The aggressive shoulder pad was purely designer-driven.
It began appearing on high-fashion runways in the fall of 1978, with, at times, an exaggerated, almost architectural width, sometimes measuring up to 3 feet across.
This initial aggressive structure was imposed from the top down. Our sources indicate it met with strong public resistance.
Precisely because of its restrictive nature and its clear resemblance to the heavily structured styles of the 1940s and 50s.
An era the 1970s had actively tried to escape. What we see, philosophically, is the pursuit of freedom giving way to a new requirement for professional armor.
We shift now, from the intimate fabric of self-expression to a different type of structure entirely, the institutional mechanics of trust.
We're considering the simple retail transaction and the device that validated it, the cash register.
And the genesis of this mechanical sentinel is fundamentally born from a lack of trust.
A compelling observation. The original and singular purpose of its invention in the late 1800s was not sophisticated accounting.
No, it was simply to prevent employee theft. Before its arrival, business owners had virtually no control over cash handling by their staff.
Especially in high-volume environments like saloons.
Consider the very first device, created by James Ritty, a saloon owner in Dayton, Ohio in 1879.
He called it Ritty's incorruptible cashier.
And it is crucial to understand what this first device lacked. It had no cash drawer. It did not print receipts.
Its operational necessity was purely auditory.
Yes. When a sale was entered, the machine made a loud ding sound. An alarm, alerting the owner that a transaction had occurred and been registered. The sound was a guarantee.
Following Ritty's sale of the rights, the National Cash Register Company, NCR, began incorporating the familiar essentials.
The secure cash drawers, the mechanism for printing receipts.
But for decades, these machines remained extraordinarily intricate mechanical sentinels, often beautifully crafted, engraved brass boxes.
Relying entirely on complex systems of cranks, levers, and keys.
It wasn't until the 1940s and 50s that electric motors began to slowly replace the hand cranks.
The decisive digital shift arrived in the 1970s. The introduction of electronic cash registers, the ECRs, fundamentally changed the nature of the transaction.
These machines could store prices, automatically calculate complex change,
and print receipts quickly and efficiently using the new thermal paper technology. The machine became the memory, the infallible accountant.
Which brings us back to the sensory experience, specifically the element of sound.
The classic ka-ching.
That universally recognizable sound was not an accidental byproduct. It was deliberately integrated into those early models.
It functioned as an auditory reassurance, a specific acoustic signal designed to establish confidence in the recorded transaction.
Confirming for everyone that the till drawer had opened and the sale had been logged.
The transition from the simple, sharp ding of distrust to the musical ka-ching of confidence is a quiet cultural indicator.
A sign of trust becoming mechanized.
And if the cash register represented the institutional mechanism of localized trust, we must now consider the macro scale.
The mechanism that defined the vast structure of American life. The relationship with the automobile in the mid-1970s.
This relationship was the central engine for the general expansion of business activity. It created the geographic scale of modern life.
The reliance was truly staggering by 1977. Sales of new cars and trucks were approaching 15 million units.
Nearly matching the record set just 4 years prior, in 1973.
And on the road, there are approximately 128 million registered motor vehicles, supporting a population that relied on personal transportation.
Due to the deliberate contraction of central cities and the aggressive continuing sprawl into outlying suburban areas.
The automobile was not a luxury. It was the foundation of the modern map.
Yet this engine of expansion was operating under immense financial and regulatory duress.
The average sales price of a new car reached approximately $5,700 by mid-1977.
A monumental 59% increase in just 5 years. This significantly outpaced the overall consumer price index, which rose 45% over the same period.
Which indicates that rising costs were driven by more than simple inflation.
A confluence of materials costs, and crucially, regulatory requirements, was pushing value upward. Operating costs were estimated at 30 cents per mile.
Compounding this was the new regulatory mandate. U.S. car producers were required to dramatically improve average fuel economy.
From about 18 miles per gallon on 1978 models to 27.5 miles per gallon by 1985.
a necessity that required massive capital expenditure on what the industry called downsizing and developing lighter materials.
A fundamental and costly restructuring of the production process.
And this regulatory push collided directly, often violently, with entrenched consumer preferences.
We saw the clearest evidence of this tension in 1974. Demand for small, fuel-efficient cars surged dramatically during the gas shortage.
But critically, this demand collapsed almost immediately once gasoline supplies normalized.
It was a fleeting, reactive demand, not a sustainable trend.
The consumer preference, it turned out, remained enduringly clear,
favoring the larger domestic cars.
Industry analysts confirmed that American households were, quote, ready to pay substantially higher prices for fuel rather than sacrifice carrying capacity, engine power, and perhaps most importantly, prestige.
The vehicle remained a symbol of scale and success, not merely a device for efficiency.
And to reconcile this preference for large, expensive vehicles with rising prices, a financial mechanism had to adapt.
The average maturity of new car loans began lengthening significantly. By 1977, the average new car loan had stretched to 41 months.
This was not just an adjustment, it was a fundamental shift that eased the monthly payments.
And thereby reinforced the necessity and value of the automobile, transforming it from a mere purchase into a deeply entrenched and highly prized possession.
Acquired through slow, long-term debt. If we synthesize the patterns revealed across these three artifacts, the 1970s present themselves as a decade defined by a peculiar pursuit of freedom.
The freedom to dress in unconstructed clothes.
The freedom to finance a massive, powerful vehicle.
And the freedom to challenge outdated social rules and professional formalities.
Yet, what this deep dive underscores is a fundamental historical irony that permeates the material culture of the period.
That the very drive toward organic freedom, flow, and comfort often generates its own opposing new structure.
The soft look, initially celebrated for its fluidity and its feminist rejection of structured restraint,
eventually yielded to the highly constructed, almost aggressive shoulder pads, a tailored form signaling a shift toward enforced power.
Likewise, the desire for transaction ease and confidence required the imposition of mechanical and then digital watchfulness.
The cash register. A formalized structure built upon and sustained by original distrust.
And the desire for mobility and scale necessitated a new financial scaffolding, the lengthening of credit terms that bound the consumer to the very scale they desired.
The structure, therefore, always returns.
We're left to contemplate this critical pattern.
Does the search for greater individual comfort and social liberation inevitably invite a larger, often less personal force of control or constraint to fill the resulting void? This recurring balance between liberation and framework is perhaps the most enduring legacy of the 1970s.